Have you ever been flipping through channels late at night, half asleep, only to sit bolt upright because what you just saw on screen made absolutely no sense? Maybe it was a talking baby selling stock advice, or a strange creature insisting you try a sandwich, or a woman repeatedly applying something directly to her forehead with a blank stare. If you've experienced that moment of pure, unadulterated confusion, then you already know the strange magic of the absurd American television commercial. These aren't just ads, they're bizarre little time capsules, surreal 30-second dreams that somehow made it past a boardroom full of executives and into our living rooms, forever burned into our collective memory. They represent a side of American culture that is unapologetically weird, fiercely creative in the most baffling ways, and often so memorable precisely because they leave us asking one simple question: what were they thinking? Today, we're not just watching these commercials, we're diving headfirst into the wonderfully strange world of American advertising to count down the 33 most absurd, perplexing, and utterly unforgettable TV commercials ever to grace the airwaves. This is more than a list, it's a journey back through decades of marketing madness, a celebration of those glorious moments when a company decided that making sense was far less important than making sure you never, ever forgot their product, no matter how many therapy sessions it might cost you. From the psychedelic 70s to the ironic 2000s, these ads are a testament to a very specific kind of American audacity, the belief that if you can't be the best, you might as well be the weirdest. We'll be revisiting infamous campaigns that became cultural phenomena for all the wrong reasons, like the hypnotic and endlessly repetitive HeadOn application, the unsettling Quiznos Spongmonkeys that looked like they crawled out of a forgotten nightmare, and so many other gems that make you wonder if the ad agency was trying to sell a product or just prank the entire nation. So get comfortable, maybe grab a snack, though maybe not the one being sold by a singing rodent, and join us as we explore the hilarious, the cringe-worthy, and the downright baffling stories behind the ads that America tried to forget but simply couldn't. This is a ride you won't want to miss. And so we begin our countdown with a commercial so bafflingly simple, so hypnotically repetitive that it transcended mere advertising and became a genuine cultural artifact. This is, of course, the legendary ad for HeadOn. The setup is almost aggressively bare bones. A woman with a perfectly neutral expression stares directly into the camera, holding a small white applicator. There is no jingle, no demonstration of the product in use, no scientific diagrams, and absolutely no explanation of how or why this wax-based stick might actually relieve a headache. Instead, we are given only a stark, robotic command, delivered 3 times in succession with the rhythmic precision of a strange mantra: HeadOn, apply directly to the forehead. The sheer absurdity of this approach is what made it so instantly unforgettable. In a media landscape saturated with fast cuts, celebrity endorsements, and exaggerated claims, HeadOn opted for a form of advertising hypnosis. It offered no information, only instruction. It was this very lack of context that fueled its viral spread in an era just before social media. The ad became a punchline, a meme in the truest sense, parodied on late-night talk shows and debated around office water coolers. Everyone was asking the same question: what is this thing and why is it being applied directly to the forehead? The commercial didn't just sell a product, it created a shared moment of national confusion, and in doing so, achieved a level of brand recognition most marketers can only dream of. But behind the bizarre spectacle was a more controversial story. The Federal Trade Commission eventually stepped in, questioning the advertiser's claims about the product's efficacy. It turned out there was no reliable scientific evidence to support the idea that this topical application could actually cure headaches. The company was eventually compelled to modify its advertising and include disclaimers. This makes HeadOn a perfect, almost poetic example of style completely overwhelming substance. It was a triumph of marketing in its purest, most brutal form. A campaign that achieved massive success not by convincing viewers the product worked, but by making the product's name and its bizarre, singular instruction so utterly unavoidable that it was seared into public consciousness. It was an empty vessel, but my, what a memorable vessel it was. If HeadOn proved that pure, mindless repetition could sear a product into the public consciousness, then our next entry demonstrated that sometimes being unforgettable is not the same thing as being successful. We are, of course, talking about the surreal nightmare fuel that was the Quiznos Spongmonkeys campaign. This was not a simple, repetitive ad. It was a full-blown auditory and visual assault, a descent into a digital uncanny valley that left an entire nation of viewers simultaneously humming a catchy tune and questioning their own sanity. The creatures themselves were the brainchildren of British internet animator Joel Veitch, who created them for his website rathergood.com. They were bizarre, rat-like CGI beings with wobbling, undercooked bodies, disturbingly long tongues, and enormous, bulging eyes that seemed to stare directly into your soul. And then there were the voices, shrill, sped-up chipmunk tones singing an infectiously simple jingle about their love for Quiznos subs. We love the subs, they chirped, because they are good to us. It was a meme before the concept of a viral video was fully understood by corporate marketing, a piece of authentic, weird internet culture that Quiznos decided to inject directly into the mainstream via multi-million-dollar television ad buys. The corporate logic was a gamble on attracting a younger, internet-savvy demographic they felt was slipping away. The result, however, was one of the most polarized reactions in advertising history. For a segment of the audience, the Spongmonkeys were hilarious, an absurdist break from the bland, predictable world of fast food advertising. They were weird, they were catchy, and they felt like an inside joke shared with a brand. But for a much larger portion of the viewing public, the reaction was one of pure, unadulterated revulsion. These were not cute cartoon mascots. They were deeply unsettling, even terrifying, especially to children and families who formed the core of Quiznos' customer base. The campaign generated immense buzz, but it was the kind of buzz that comes from a swarm of angry wasps, loud, aggressive, and ultimately damaging. In the end, the Spongmonkeys became a textbook case of absurdity backfiring. The ads were pulled from the airwaves after just a few months, not because people weren't talking about them, but because the conversation was actively hurting the brand. The bizarre creatures had successfully scared away the very families that bought most of the sandwiches, making the campaign a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing virality over brand identity. Quiznos learned the hard way that there's a very thin line between being memorably weird and being genuinely off-putting. If the Spongmonkeys represented a gamble on weirdness that spectacularly backfired, the next entry on our list represents a gamble on pure, unadulterated controversy that paid off in an unprecedented way. We're venturing into the high-stakes world of Super Bowl advertising, where a 30-second spot can cost millions, and the goal is to be the ad everyone talks about on Monday morning. In 2005, a virtually unknown company called GoDaddy.com decided the best way to achieve that goal was not with a funny animal or a celebrity cameo, but by staging a parody of one of the most infamous moments in television history. The ad in question is a masterclass in absurd, calculated provocation. It opens on a hearing room, a clear reference to the congressional inquiries following Janet Jackson's wardrobe malfunction at the previous year's Super Bowl halftime show. A beautiful woman in a very tight, low-cut tank top is testifying before a stern panel of legislators. They demand she demonstrate exactly what happened. She complies, and as she adjusts her top, the fabric strains, threatening to reveal everything. The tension is absurdly high for an ad-selling website domain names. Just as it seems a malfunction is imminent, the camera cuts to a relieved GoDaddy executive watching on television who proudly declares, still waiting for that .com boom. The sheer, brazen absurdity of using sexual titillation to sell something as profoundly unsexy as domain registration is almost comical. There was no logical connection between the product and the pitch, and that was entirely the point. GoDaddy wasn't selling a service, it was selling an attitude. The ad was designed to be shocking, to generate outrage, and most importantly, to get rejected by the network standards and practices department. And that's exactly what happened. News that the ad had been banned became a story in itself, generating a tsunami of free media coverage that no amount of paid advertising could ever buy. When a slightly toned-down version was eventually approved to air, it was immediately met with a firestorm of viewer complaints to the Federal Communications Commission, which only served to fuel the news cycle further. The result was a marketing coup of legendary proportions. On the night of the Super Bowl, GoDaddy's website traffic exploded, crashing their servers under the weight of millions of curious visitors. They had successfully hacked the system, understanding that in the modern media landscape, controversy is a currency more valuable than clarity. They set a new, racy precedent for Super Bowl ads, proving that a company could launch itself into the public consciousness not through a clever jingle or a heartwarming story, but through the sheer, absurd power of being the most talked about, scandalous thing on television. It was a bizarre, cynical, and utterly brilliant stroke that cemented their brand by embracing the oldest trick in the book: sex sells even when you're selling.com. From the calculated, boardroom-approved chaos of a Super Bowl scandal, we now travel to the gritty, local television airwaves of 1980s New York City, where a different kind of madness was taking root. This was the era of Crazy Eddie, and his prices were, as we were told in a frenetic shout approximately every 7 minutes, completely insane. If the GoDaddy ad was a sleek corporate provocation, the Crazy Eddie commercial was its polar opposite, a raw, unfiltered, and gloriously unhinged explosion of local advertising that felt less like a sales pitch and more like a man having a breakdown in your living room. The face of this beautiful madness was usually not the real Eddie Ante, but a brilliant character actor named Jerry Carroll. With his wide, wild eyes, slightly disheveled suit, and a delivery so frantic it seemed he might vibrate right through the television screen, Carroll became the avatar of retail insanity. The commercials were a sensory assault. The camera would shake and zoom erratically, cutting between Carroll screaming directly into the lens and rapid-fire shots of stereo equipment and television sets, all while prices for seemingly everything in the store flashed in giant, garish text. The audio was a cacophony of Carroll's rapid-fire promises, a pulsing, synthetic musical beat, and the constant, piercing scream of the iconic tagline, delivered with a possessed fervor: Crazy Eddie. His prices are insane. It was advertising as a form of comedy and performance art, a character so over the top he became instantly, indelibly memorable. This persona was a masterstroke. In a market as crowded and competitive as New York electronics retail, you couldn't just be better, you had to be louder. Crazy Eddie wasn't just selling stereos and VCRs, he was selling an experience, a personality. The crazy shtick brilliantly disarmed consumers. How could you not trust a guy who seemed to have lost his mind in the pursuit of giving you a deal? The ads constructed a mythology of retail rebellion, portraying Eddie as a mad genius heroically fighting against the greedy giants to slash prices for the everyday New Yorker. It was pure theater, and it worked phenomenally well, building an empire of over 40 stores that dominated the tri-state area. But the true, darker layer of absurdity was lurking behind the scenes, a reality far stranger and more shocking than any fictional character Jerry Carroll could invent. The real Eddie Ante was not a bumbling, lovable madman. He was a sophisticated financial criminal orchestrating one of the largest securities frauds of the decade. The insane prices were allegedly subsidized by an insane web of accounting deception, a massive scheme involving fake inventory, hidden losses, and money laundering that inflated the company's value to lure in investors. The entire public persona was a carefully constructed lie. The chaotic, "we're losing money on every sale" image was a front for an operation that was, in fact, secretly making millions through fraud. The house of cards collapsed in spectacular fashion. The Anta family was investigated by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and Eddie eventually fled the country, living as a fugitive before being captured and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The final, surreal chapter in the Crazy Eddie story revealed that the true insanity wasn't the prices or the commercials. It was the breathtaking audacity of the crime itself. The ads, once seen as hilarious and hyperbolic, were retroactively cast in a sinister, ironic light. They became a perfect, almost Shakespearean symbol of the greed and excess of the 1980s, a decade where the line between ambitious salesmanship and outright fraud often seemed to blur. The character of Crazy Eddie endures not just as a nostalgic relic of loud advertising, but as a permanent, cautionary monument to the fact that sometimes the most absurd thing about a commercial isn't what's on the screen, but the unbelievable truth happening just behind it. After the cautionary tales of mascots gone wrong and scandals carefully manufactured, the advertising world seemed to ask a new, even more surreal question: what if we just leaned all the way into the nonsense? The answer arrived during Super Bowl 50 in 2016, a year already known for its spectacle, and it came in the form of a creation that defied all reason and several laws of nature. It was time for the world to meet PuppyMonkeyBaby. The ad opens not with a product shot or a celebrity, but with a group of young people in a dark, moody apartment looking for a snack to fuel their late-night hangout. The scene feels almost normal until a tiny, bizarre creature comes skipping into the room. It's a chillingly smooth CGI fusion of a puppy's head, a monkey's body, and a human baby's face, all moving with a jaunty, unsettling bounce. It's holding a can of Mountain Dew Kickstart, and as it begins to dance, it chants a simple, hypnotic phrase in a high-pitched, synthesized voice: PuppyMonkeyBaby. PuppyMonkeyBaby. It then elaborates on its mission, stating it has the energy of a puppy, the fun of a monkey, and the refreshing taste of a baby. The line about the taste of a baby was particularly jarring, a moment of such bizarre, accidental cannibalistic imagery that it left many viewers utterly stunned. The creature then encourages the partygoers to share the fun, passing around more cans of the drink before the ad concludes with the cheerful monster continuing its repetitive chant. The goal, as explained by the creative agency behind it, was to break through the incredible clutter of Super Bowl advertising by creating something so utterly absurd and meme-ready that it would dominate online conversation. They weren't just selling a caffeine and juice drink, they were selling a moment. The logic in the context of marketing to a generation raised on internet absurdity and surreal humor was surprisingly sound. They calculated that being weird was more valuable than being liked. They wanted to create a character so strange, so inexplicable, that you simply had to talk about it, to text your friends about it, to post about it online. In that sense, the campaign was a direct descendant of the Spongmonkeys, but with a crucial difference. It was polished, expensive, and aired during the most watched television event of the year. This was weirdness with a multi-million-dollar budget. The public reaction was a perfect split down the middle, exactly as the creators had likely hoped. For one audience, PuppyMonkeyBaby was an instant classic of weird humor. It was so stupid, so random, that it looped back around to being hilarious. It became an instant meme, with the creature photoshopped into other commercials, movie scenes, and works of art. For the other half of the audience, the reaction was pure, unadulterated horror. The creature's design, with its vacant baby eyes and unnatural movement, tapped directly into the uncanny valley, eliciting a deep, visceral feeling of wrongness. Parents reported their children being frightened by the ad, and countless articles were written debating whether it was the best or worst commercial of the Super Bowl. Ultimately, the ad achieved its primary objective with spectacular efficiency. It was the #1 most talked about ad on social media that night and for the entire week that followed. Whether you loved it or were genuinely terrified by it, you knew about it. You had an opinion about it. The sheer absurdity of PuppyMonkeyBaby had cut through the noise of every other celebrity-packed, effects-driven commercial, proving once again that in the economy of attention, there is no currency more valuable than the bizarre. It was a calculated experiment in surrealism that demonstrated a fundamental truth of modern advertising. It's better to be unforgettable for the wrong reasons than to be forgotten for the right ones. After the high-tech, CGI-generated nightmare of PuppyMonkeyBaby, we take a hard turn back toward a simpler time, a time when the height of home automation wasn't a voice-activated smart speaker, but a humble little box you plugged into your wall outlet. We're talking, of course, about the Clapper and its legendary commercial, a masterpiece of straightforward, low-budget charm that offered a magical solution to one of life's most pressing problems, having to physically walk over and flip a light switch. The ad itself is a beautiful artifact of 1980s practicality. It typically opens on a scene of domestic bliss, often featuring a lovely older couple settling in for the night. The husband is in his easy chair, the wife is cozied up in bed, and they're both ready to turn out the lights, but oh, the agony of having to get up. The sheer inconvenience, this is where the Clapper swoops in as the hero. With a simple, cheerful clap of the hands, the lamps flick off, another clap, and they snap back on. The delight on the actors' faces is utterly genuine and completely infectious. They're not just turning off lights, they're participating in a miracle of modern science, their clapping hands conducting a symphony of convenience. The commercial then rapidly demonstrates the device's versatility: clap on, clap off for the coffee maker, the television, the radio. The world was now your oyster, provided your oyster responded to percussive sounds. The sheer absurdity of the premise is what made it so perfect. This wasn't solving a major life problem. It was eliminating a minor annoyance with a solution that felt both futuristic and vaguely ridiculous. It was the ultimate why not product, but the true, undeniable star of the show was the jingle. Simple, impossibly catchy, and engineered in a lab to be unforgettable, it burrowed into the cerebral cortex of everyone who heard it. Clap on, clap, clap, clap off. Clap, clap the clapper. Those 5 notes and 4 claps became one of the most effective earworms in advertising history, a Pavlovian trigger for an entire generation. You couldn't hear it without mentally completing the phrase, your hands twitching with the urge to participate. This combination of a silly but appealing concept and an iconic jingle propelled the Clapper far beyond its status as a mere novelty item. It became a genuine pop culture staple, a shared reference point that transcended its infomercial origins. It was parodied on Saturday Night Live, featured in movies like Friday the 13th Part 7, and referenced in countless television shows. It became the undisputed king of the as seen on TV product world, a symbol of that particular brand of American ingenuity that promises to make your life easier in the smallest, most specific ways imaginable. The Clapper wasn't just selling a gadget, it was selling a tiny piece of joy, a little bit of magic you could install in your own home for 3 easy payments of $19.95. It represented a time when the future wasn't about global connectivity or artificial intelligence, but about the pure, simple, wonderful power of a well-timed clap. Just when you thought the world of strange fitness gadgets had reached its peak with thigh masters and ab rollers, along came an invention that redefined the concept of working out with an intensity that was, to put it mildly, hard to ignore. We are, of course, talking about the Shake Weight, a product whose commercial was so bizarrely, blatantly suggestive that it didn't just sell a piece of exercise equipment. It launched 1,000 late-night talk show jokes and became an instant icon of unintentional comedy. The ad itself is a masterclass in double entendre, played with the straight-faced seriousness of a scientific documentary. It opens with incredibly fit men and women, their faces etched with a look of intense, almost spiritual concentration. They grip the distinctive dumbbell with two hands and begin to shake it vigorously back and forth with short, rapid thrusts. The entire presentation is soaked in a layer of absurd dramatics. Slow-motion shots capture every jiggle and muscle contraction, while a sweeping, orchestral score worthy of a Hollywood epic swells in the background. A solemn, authoritative voiceover extols the virtues of dynamic inertia, explaining how the oscillating motion is scientifically proven to work the muscles more effectively than static holds. The entire production feels like a parody of itself, a high-concept art film about the most low-concept product imaginable. The sheer disconnect between the ridiculously provocative motion and the narrator's utterly deadpan delivery is what makes it so hypnotically funny. It was impossible to watch without your brain making the connection. The suggestive nature of the movement was so obvious that the public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The commercial became a viral sensation long before that term was commonplace, not for its effectiveness but for its unintentional hilarity. It was parodied on Saturday Night Live, mocked by The Daily Show, and dissected on every major news network. Family advocacy groups were outraged, leading several major networks to outright ban the ad from daytime television for its sexually suggestive content. The controversy, of course, only fueled its notoriety, transforming the shake weight from a simple fitness gadget into a cultural punchline. And yet, for all the laughter and outrage, the campaign was a staggering commercial success. The company sold millions of units, generating over $40 million in revenue in its first year. This success reveals a fascinating, if cynical, marketing genius. The creators understood that being memorable was more important than being dignified. Whether by calculated design or happy accident, they had crafted an ad that was impossible to look away from and even harder to forget. The controversy was the engine of its sales. The widespread parody was free advertising. People weren't just buying a workout tool, they were buying a piece of the joke, a conversation starter for parties, the ultimate white elephant gift. The shake weight demonstrated that in the crowded marketplace of American consumerism, there is no such thing as bad publicity, only publicity. It proved that sometimes the most direct path to the wallet is a road paved with sheer, unadulterated absurdity. If the shake weight taught us that absurdity could be a calculated path to profit, then the next figure on our list proved that pure, unadulterated, ear-shattering enthusiasm could become an art form all its own. To talk about absurd American commercials without paying tribute to the late, great Billy Mays would be like discussing rock and roll without mentioning Elvis. He wasn't just a pitchman, he was a force of nature, a larger-than-life personality who could make a tub of powdered stain remover feel like the most thrilling invention since the wheel. And it all started with that voice, that glorious, booming cannon blast of a voice that cut through the static of everyday life with three simple words: "Hi, Billy Mays here." His signature style was a beautifully orchestrated assault on the senses. He always appeared in his trademark blue button-down shirt, his beard impeccably groomed, his eyes wide with an almost manic passion for the product at hand. There was no subtlety, no soft sell, only an overwhelming wave of confidence and volume. He didn't just talk about OxyClean, he preached the gospel of OxyClean. He would lean into the camera, his voice rising to a crescendo as he described its power, not as a mere cleaning agent, but as a revolutionary tool that could restore order to your chaotic, stain-filled world. The presentation was a spectacle of sheer belief, and his absolute conviction was so infectious that you started to believe too. How could something he was this excited about not work? The demonstrations were where the true absurd genius shone through. Billy Mays didn't just show you a product, he performed a miracle in 30 seconds. He would take the most hopelessly ruined garments imaginable, a white shirt drenched in red wine, grass stains, and motor oil, a baseball cap caked in mud and grease, and he would treat them with a theatricality usually reserved for a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. He'd dunk the item into a tub of hot water, sprinkle in a generous scoop of OxyClean, and then, with the dramatic pause of a seasoned showman, he would pull it out. The fabric wouldn't just be cleaner, it would be pristine, reborn, as if the stains had never existed. The after-shot was always held up with a triumphant flourish, a gleaming testament to his claims. He made the mundane act of laundry feel like a high-stakes scientific breakthrough, and we were all lucky enough to have a front-row seat. But to dismiss Billy Mays as just a loud man on TV is to miss his profound impact on the entire landscape of advertising. He perfected the direct response commercial, turning what was often a cheap, repetitive format into must-see entertainment. People didn't just tolerate his ads, they actively enjoyed them. He became a beloved cultural icon, his persona so recognizable that he transcended his role as a salesman and became a character in the national comedy. He was parodied, imitated, and celebrated because his enthusiasm, while overwhelming, was undeniably genuine. He believed in the power of a good scrub, and he made millions of Americans believe with him. He took a commodity product and gave it a personality, his personality. In doing so, Billy Mays didn't just sell cleaning supplies. He turned the act of selling itself into a form of performance art, leaving behind a legacy that proves sometimes the most powerful tool in advertising isn't a special effect or a clever joke, but simply the power of one man's undeniable, thunderous, and absolutely absurd passion. While Billy Mays brought the thunder of pure, unbridled salesmanship, Reebok decided to bring the actual thunder of a linebacker's hit into the most sterile environment imaginable, the modern corporate office. For the Super Bowl in 2003, they introduced the world to Terry Tate, office linebacker, and in doing so, created a series of commercials so explosively funny and perfectly executed that they instantly became the stuff of legend. The premise was as simple as it was absurd. What if a major corporation decided to hire a former football star to literally tackle the problem of workplace inefficiency? The answer was a masterclass in physical comedy and cathartic wish fulfillment that resonated with anyone who has ever suffered through the mind-numbing frustrations of office life. The ads drop us directly into a drab, beige-colored officescape, a world of cubicles, water coolers, and soul-crushing monotony. The camera work is shaky and dynamic, mimicking the style of a live sports broadcast. And then, without warning, chaos erupts. Terry Tate, a mountain of a man in a full Reebok football uniform, comes flying into the frame to deliver a bone-jarring, full-force tackle to an unsuspecting employee. The offense: failing to put a cover sheet on a TPS report, or using the last of the coffee and not starting a new pot, or committing the ultimate sin of jamming the copier. The violence is cartoonish and over the top, sending papers flying and co-workers diving for cover, yet it's filmed with such sports broadcast sincerity that the humor lands perfectly every time. Tate would stand over his target, screaming motivational insults like, "You kill the Joe, you make some mo," before helping the dazed employee up and offering a word of encouragement, embodying a bizarre mix of brutal enforcer and caring HR manager. The sheer genius of the Terry Tate campaign lay in its brilliant fusion of the relatable and the ridiculous. Every single person who has worked in an office has encountered the petty annoyances and minor infractions that Terry violently polices. We've all been driven mad by the colleague who steals our lunch from the communal fridge, or the one who sends a reply-all email for something that only concerned two people. Terry Tate was our ID unleashed, a fantasy figure who delivered immediate, physical consequences for the behaviors we all quietly grumble about. It was cathartic, wish-fulfillment humor of the highest order, and it transformed a simple ad for athletic wear into a shared cultural moment. We weren't just watching a commercial, we were cheering for Terry to lay out the guy who didn't clean the microwave after exploding his soup, beyond the comedy, the ads were incredibly smart branding for Reebok. Terry Tate wasn't just a funny character, he was the personification of performance under pressure. His uniform and intensity directly connected the brand to the world of high-impact sports, but it did so in a context that was completely unexpected and therefore far more memorable than a standard athlete endorsement. The campaign was a critical darling and a massive hit with viewers, consistently ranking at the top of Super Bowl ad polls for years. The character was so beloved that he spawned an entire series of commercials and even a short-lived television show, a testament to the depth of the concept. The legacy of Terry Tate is that of a perfect storm, a hilarious premise, flawless execution, and a deep, empathetic understanding of its audience's daily struggles. It proved that the most effective advertising doesn't just show you a product, it makes you feel something, even if that feeling is the vicarious thrill of watching a TPS report violator get absolutely annihilated by 250 pounds of corporate-mandated justice. After the thunderous impact of Terry Tate rearranging office furniture and personnel, we shift from the fantasy of corporate justice to a commercial that captured a very different, yet equally universal reality: the simple, silly ritual of friendship. In 1999, as the world braced for Y2K and dial-up internet still sang its screeching song, Budweiser gifted the culture a single word that would become the defining greeting of an era: wassoop. The ad's construction was deceptively, brilliantly simple. It opens on a man sitting on his couch watching television with a Budweiser in his hand. The phone rings, he answers, and what follows is not a normal conversation, but a ritual. Wassoop. He drawls into the receiver, his face a mask of relaxed concentration. The call cuts to his friend doing the same thing in his own home, responding with an identical wassoop. This call then branches out, a chain of connection linking a small group of friends all engaged in the same absurd, drawn-out vocal exercise. There's no joke, no punchline, and no explanation. The entire commercial is just this bizarre, repetitive call and response, an inside joke shared with millions of viewers. It was a perfect slice of life, highlighting the unspoken, often silly languages that develop between close friends. The genius of the campaign was its authenticity. It didn't feel like a corporation trying to invent a catchphrase. It felt like they had simply eavesdropped on a real interaction and put it on television. This relatability was its rocket fuel. Almost instantly, wassup transcended advertising and became a genuine cultural virus. You heard it in school hallways, shouted across college campuses, and muttered in office break rooms. It was referenced on sitcoms, parodied on late-night shows, and even featured in movies. It was the ultimate shared cultural touchstone, a password that signaled you were in on the joke. For Budweiser, this was a marketing masterstroke. The ad never explicitly sold the beer, it sold a feeling. It associated the brand with camaraderie, relaxation, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship. By showcasing this specific, relatable social ritual, they made Budweiser the official beverage of hanging out, the liquid accompaniment to every casual get-together. The staying power of wassup is a testament to the power of absurd simplicity in advertising. Unlike so many campaigns that feel dated within a year, this one remains instantly recognizable decades later. It captured a specific moment in time, a pre-social media era where connection was still often a simple phone call between friends while simultaneously tapping into the timeless, universal need for belonging and shared identity. It proved that an ad doesn't need a complex plot, a celebrity, or even a clear sales pitch to be devastatingly effective. Sometimes all it needs is a single, perfectly delivered, gloriously absurd word that makes an entire country feel like they're all part of the same group of friends. While the wassup campaign celebrated the easy, casual bonds of friendship, another iconic campaign took a decidedly more dramatic approach to human connection. suggesting that the very fabric of family could be mended by the aromatic power of a single brand of coffee. For decades, Folgers presented itself not just as a morning beverage, but as the emotional catalyst for reconciliation, joy, and familial bliss, all set to one of the most inescapably memorable jingles in television history, the best part of whacking up. Is Folgers in your cup? The ads operated on a level of high-stakes melodrama that was completely at odds with the mundanity of making a pot of coffee. A typical narrative would open on a scene of subtle domestic tension, perhaps a tired mother, a distracted father, or siblings who weren't getting along. The atmosphere would be thick with unspoken frustration, and then the magic would begin. The sound of percolating coffee would fill the air, followed by that rich, unmistakable aroma wafting through the house. This was not presented as a simple, pleasant smell. It was a transformative wave of emotional alchemy. Characters would stop mid-argument, their faces softening as they inhaled deeply. A smile would break out, eyes would meet, and the previous conflict would instantly evaporate, replaced by warm embraces and loving laughter. Folgers wasn't selling a caffeine fix, it was selling a miracle in a can, an olfactory cure for the common family drama. No ad exemplifies this absurdly powerful narrative better than the infamous Christmas commercial, often referred to as the Peter ad. It opens on a sleepy, quiet household on Christmas morning. The mood is peaceful but subdued. A young man named Peter, who has been away for some time, quietly lets himself into the house and decides to surprise his family by brewing a pot of Folgers coffee. As the coffee brews, the aroma travels upstairs, waking his younger sister. She comes downstairs, drawn by the scent, and sees this stranger in the kitchen. There's a moment of tension and confusion. Who is this man? And then, as the iconic jingle begins to swell, the realization dawns on her face. She gasps, "Peter," and runs into his arms. The family is joyously reunited, all because the smell of Folgers acted as a supernatural family recognition beacon. The absurdity is glorious. The ad suggests that visual recognition, years of shared memories, and the simple fact that it's her brother are all secondary to the primary trigger of coffee vapor. It's a premise so heartfelt and yet so completely ridiculous that it has cemented its place in the pantheon of beloved commercial absurdity. The true engine of this decades-long campaign, however, was the jingle itself. Simple, repetitive, and crafted with surgical precision to burrow into the human brain, it was the adhesive that bound the emotional manipulation to the product. You could not hear those 5 notes without the entire phrase completing itself in your mind. It gave every Folgers commercial a sense of epic conclusion, as if the solving of this family's emotional woes was a heroic moment worthy of a musical fanfare. This combination of soap opera storytelling and an unforgettable musical hook created a potent advertising formula. Folgers successfully framed their product as more than a drink. It was the essential first step in having a perfect day, the secret ingredient for a happy home, and the magical aroma that could literally bring loved ones back together. In the world of Folgers commercials, coffee wasn't a commodity. It was the emotional hearth around which every family should gather. A truly absurd and beautiful promise sold one melodramatic 30-second spot at a time. While Folgers promised to heal family rifts with little more than a comforting aroma, the next commercial on our list offered a far more surreal and impossible fantasy, one that didn't just break the fourth wall, it vaporized it with the sheer force of its absurdity. In 2010, Old Spice, a brand that had become a dusty relic associated with grandfathers and bygone eras, executed one of the most stunning brand resurrections in advertising history. The weapon, a single, immaculately crafted 30-second spot titled "The Man Your Man Could Smell Like," featuring the impossibly suave and confident Isaiah Mustafa. The ad begins with a direct, almost confrontational address. Mustafa, shirtless and standing in a bathroom, looks directly into the camera and says, "Hello, ladies." This simple greeting immediately establishes a new paradigm. This ad isn't for men, it's about men, for the women who might buy the product for them. He holds up a bottle of Old Spice body wash and launches into a rapid-fire monologue that is a masterclass in surreal, non-sequitur humor. The entire commercial is filmed to look like one seamless, impossible take. He starts in the bathroom, telling you to look at your man, then back to him. Sadly, he isn't me, he declares before the scene instantly changes. He's now suddenly on a horse. Then, with a dismissive flick of his wrist, he's magically transported onto the deck of a yacht, holding the tickets to That Thing You Love. The transitions are flawless, the logic is non-existent, and the pace is so breakneck that you scarcely have time to process one impossible feat before he's on to the next, all while maintaining an unwavering, deadpan delivery of increasingly ridiculous lines. He promises diamonds, and with a snap of his fingers, his hand is indeed covered in them. The ad culminates with him back on the horse on a beach, delivering the iconic tagline, "I'm on a horse." The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of the sequence was its genius. It was a whirlwind of impossible visuals and hilarious arrogance that felt less like a traditional commercial and more like a perfectly crafted internet sketch. It was weird, it was clever, and it was utterly, completely shareable. But the true revolutionary stroke was the marketing campaign that followed. Old Spice didn't just release the ad and hope for the best, they launched a viral blitz. They had Isaiah Mustafa, still in character, respond in real time to hundreds of questions and comments from celebrities and everyday users on social media platforms like Twitter and Reddit. He created personalized video replies, continuing the absurdist persona and directly engaging with the audience. This turned a passive viewing experience into an interactive event, making Old Spice the center of the online conversation for weeks. The impact was seismic. The campaign didn't just go viral, it completely revitalized the Old Spice brand, shaking off its stodgy image and repositioning it as the choice for a new, confident, and self-aware generation. Sales skyrocketed, increasing by over 100% in the months following the ad's release. More importantly, it changed the advertising playbook. The Man Your Man Could Smell Like proved that the most effective way to reach a modern audience was not through straightforward product demonstration, but through entertainment, surreal humor, and a willingness to embrace the bizarre. It demonstrated the immense power of creating content that people actively wanted to watch and share, rather than simply tolerate. It pushed the entire industry toward a new era of internet-native, highly creative advertising, where being clever and memorable was infinitely more valuable than being literal. In one fell swoop, a shirtless man on a horse didn't just sell body wash, he ushered in a new golden age of absurdity, proving that the fastest way to a consumer's heart was through a series of gloriously impossible, side-splittingly funny non-sequiturs. But while Old Spice sold confidence through surrealism, another product took a far more literal approach to solving life's problems, no matter how minor those problems might have been. It was the late 2000s, and into our collective consciousness slid a product so simple, so bafflingly obvious, that its infomercial became an instant classic of the genre. We are, of course, talking about the Snuggie, the blanket with sleeves. The now legendary infomercial opens not with glamour or excitement, but with a montage of profound, almost existential struggle. Everyday people are shown trying to enjoy a blanket while also attempting to perform basic tasks. A man tries to change the television channel but finds his arm trapped by the blanket, leaving him helpless. A woman attempts to read a book but must choose between warmth and turning a page. A family huddles on a chilly bleacher during a night game, their blankets rendering them useless for clapping or holding a hot drink. The production frames these minor inconveniences with the dramatic gravity of a disaster film, complete with somber, piano-driven music and actors whose faces are etched with genuine-seeming despair. The problem, as the infomercial so gravely presents it, is that blankets are a flawed technology, a prehistoric relic that has held humanity back from true, hands-free coziness for centuries. And then the solution descends from on high. The Snuggie is presented not as a piece of fleece, but as a revelation. The tone shifts instantly from despair to euphoric joy. The same actors are now bathed in warm light, their faces beaming as they effortlessly perform tasks while enveloped in their blue or burgundy sleeved blankets. They cheer at the football game, hands clapping freely in the cold night air. They snack on popcorn without fear of buttery fingers soiling their coverings. They answer the phone, type on a laptop, and play board games, all while remaining in a state of perfect, uninterrupted warmth. The demonstrations are so earnest, so utterly committed to selling the life-changing potential of what is essentially a backwards robe, that they loop past sincerity into high art. The infomercial's peak arrives with the offer of a free gift with purchase, a matching book light, because the only thing better than reading with your hands free is reading with your hands free while also having a personal spotlight. The true masterstroke, however, was the marketing. The Snuggie didn't just sell to individuals, it sold the idea of a shared experience. The commercial's finale features a group shot of a multi-generational family, every single member, from grandparents to toddlers, adorned in identical Snuggies, all smiling beatifically as if they had just achieved nirvana through coordinated fleece. This image was pure genius, transforming a simple product into a symbol of family togetherness and quirky fun. It presented the Snuggie not as a desperate solution for the chronically cold, but as a must-have lifestyle accessory for anyone in the know. The public response was a phenomenon. The Snuggie became an overnight sensation, moving millions of units and spawning a universe of parodies, talk show segments, and even Snuggie-themed pub crawls. Its success was a testament to the power of marketing alchemy, the ability to identify a problem nobody knew they had and present a solution so simple, so ridiculous, and so viscerally demonstrated that it becomes irresistible. The Snuggie wasn't just a blanket with sleeves, it was a physical meme, a badge of honor for those who embraced its absurd comfort. It ascended to its rightful place as the king of as seen on TV culture, a perfect symbol of that uniquely American tradition of inventing and then brilliantly selling a solution for a problem that never really existed and making millions of people thrilled to have it. Yet another campaign that leaned into pure surrealism for its humor and memorability. We now turn to a commercial that went in the exact opposite direction, achieving immortality through a moment of such stark, blunt simplicity that it felt like a truth bomb dropped in the middle of prime time. This is, of course, the legendary 1984 spot for Wendy's, featuring the incomparable Clara Peller and the three words that would define an entire decade of advertising: "Where's the beef?" The setup is a masterpiece of understated absurdity. Three elderly ladies, the smallest and feistiest being Clara Peller, are presented with a gigantic, comically oversized hamburger bun at a fictional competitor's restaurant called Home of the Big Bun. The bun is pristine, puffy, and absolutely enormous, a true marvel of bakery engineering. The ladies peer at it with a mixture of curiosity and growing suspicion. One of them lifts the top half of the bun with a delicate, almost reverential touch, revealing the pathetically small, lonely-looking hamburger patty hiding beneath this mountain of bread. The disappointment is palpable. The two other women stare in silent, bewildered disbelief at the sheer audacity of the portion imbalance. And then Clara Peller leans in, her face a mask of pure, unimpressed indignation. She glares at the pathetic morsel of meat, then up at her companions, and delivers the line with a gruff, incredulous rasp that felt less like a question and more like an accusation leveled against the entire fast food industry. "Where's the beef?" The line itself was a perfectly crafted piece of cultural shrapnel. It was short, punchy, instantly understandable, and deeply funny because it was so utterly true. It gave voice to the silent frustration of every customer who had ever felt cheated by a product that promised grandeur but delivered disappointment. It was the ultimate critique, wrapped in the packaging of a sweet old lady who just wanted a decent hamburger. The phrase didn't just enter the cultural lexicon, it exploded into it. Almost overnight, "Where's the beef?" became the go-to retort for questioning the substance of anything: a political policy, a business proposal, a flimsy argument. It transcended its commercial origins to become a universal shorthand for demanding substance over style. The proof of its impact came in the most unexpected of arenas: presidential politics. During the 1984 Democratic primary debates, frontrunner Walter Mondale was searching for a way to critique the flashy, image-heavy campaign of his rival, Senator Gary Hart, whose platform was famously built on the vague theme of new ideas. During a televised debate, Mondale seized his moment, turning to Hart and asking, "When I hear your new ideas, I'm reminded of that ad, 'Where's the beef?'" The line landed with devastating effect. The audience roared with laughter and immediate recognition. Mondale had successfully weaponized a fast food slogan to frame his opponent as all style and no substance, a moment that is widely credited with helping him secure the nomination. A commercial had not just reflected culture, it had actively shaped a pivotal moment in American politics. For Wendy's, the campaign was a monumental success. The ad brilliantly positioned the chain as the honest, no-nonsense alternative to its larger rivals, McDonald's and Burger King. It wasn't just selling a bigger burger, it was selling integrity. It implied that while other chains might try to dazzle you with fluffy bread or fancy gimmicks, Wendy's was focused on the core, substantive element you actually came for: a hearty, quality beef patty. Sales surged following the ad's release, and the campaign helped solidify Wendy's reputation for a superior product. The absurd genius of the commercial lay in its inversion of expectations. Instead of a loud, hard sell boasting about what they had, Wendy's built an entire campaign around a quiet, hilarious critique of what everyone else was missing. In doing so, they didn't just ask a question, they provided the answer, forever associating their brand with the simple, undeniable satisfaction of a burger that actually delivers. Long before the SpongeMonkeys haunted our dreams and our appetites, Quiznos was already experimenting with a uniquely strange flavor of advertising, one that traded in surreal animation for something perhaps even more unsettling: the awkwardness of real human movement. This earlier campaign featured a live-action jingle that felt like it was beamed in from a parallel universe where corporate focus groups had never been invented. The ad is a masterclass in controlled cringe, opening on a group of ordinary people standing in a stark, nondescript setting. They begin to sing, their voices a flat, almost monotone chorus, delivering the painfully simple lyrics: "They're gonna get great Subway taste. Nope, Quiznos subs, they're gonna get great Subway taste. Nope, Quiznos subs." The true, glorious absurdity, however, isn't in the lyrics but in the choreography, or rather the complete lack of it. The performers engage in a series of stiff, jerky, almost robotic movements. They pivot sharply at the waist, their arms swinging in stiff, unnatural arcs as they point emphatically toward an unseen Quiznos location. There are no smiles, no sense of joy or genuine enthusiasm. Instead, their faces hold a blank, determined expression, as if they are under some kind of mild hypnosis and are compelled to perform this ritual against their will. The entire presentation feels less like a celebration of a sandwich and more like a passive-aggressive threat set to music, a bizarre public service announcement from a universe where the wrong sandwich choice has dire, albeit unexplained, consequences. This approach is a classic, if incredibly high-risk, advertising strategy often referred to as badvertising. The idea of creating something so intentionally awkward, repetitive, or cheesy that it bypasses conventional criticism and becomes memorable purely through its sheer, unabashed strangeness. The theory is that in a landscape of polished, forgettable ads, being memorably bad is better than being instantly ignored. The Quiznos jingle certainly achieved this, Its grating repetition and uncomfortable choreography made it impossible to look away from, searing the brand name into the viewer's mind through a combination of confusion and second-hand embarrassment. It was a gamble on the idea that any reaction, even a negative one, is preferable to no reaction at all. So why did this peculiar jingle fail to achieve the same level of infamous notoriety as the Spongmonkeys that would follow it? The difference lies in the nature of the weirdness itself. The live-action jingle was bizarre, but its bizarreness was human scale. It was awkward and repetitive in a way that felt familiar, almost like a low-budget local commercial that had accidentally stumbled onto national television. It was easy to dismiss as simply a bad ad. The Spongmonkeys, by contrast, were something else entirely. They were a full-blown surrealist nightmare, a piece of authentic internet-born weirdness that felt alien and invasive. Their horror was not in their awkwardness but in their otherworldly, grotesque design, which triggered a much deeper, more visceral reaction of fear and revulsion in a significant portion of the audience. The jingle was weird and annoying. The Spongmonkeys were legitimately frightening. While it never became the cultural lightning rod its successor would, this early Quiznos campaign remains a fascinating and wonderfully absurd footnote in the annals of fast food advertising. It serves as a perfect precursor to the Spongmonkey debacle, showcasing a brand that was clearly willing to push boundaries and embrace the strange in a desperate bid to stand out. It was a trial run in high-risk marketing, a lesson that sometimes being memorable isn't enough. You have to be the right kind of memorable. The jingle was the bizarre opening act, but the Spongmonkeys were the terrifying headliner that ultimately brought the house down. If the world of absurd commercials has taught us anything, it's that the strangest things often become the most enduring, and few ads exemplify this paradox more perfectly than the haunting plea that echoed through living rooms in the late 1980s. "I've fallen and I can't get up." This was the desperate cry at the heart of the LifeCall medical alert system commercials, a campaign that somehow managed to be profoundly disturbing, darkly practical, and unintentionally hilarious all at the same time, cementing its place in the cultural firmament not through slick production or humor, but through pure, unadulterated melodrama. The ad's construction is stark and simple, playing out like a miniature tragedy. An elderly woman, identified in later campaigns as actress Edith Four, is shown puttering about her home alone. The scene is quiet, domestic, and safe. Then disaster strikes. She slips and falls on her kitchen floor, out of reach of any telephone. The camera focuses on her face, etched with genuine panic and helplessness. With a trembling hand, she presses the pendant on her necklace and speaks those 5 fateful words into the device: "I've fallen and I can't get up." The ad then cuts to a reassuring shot of a LifeCall operator who calmly responds, "We're sending help immediately, Mrs. Fletcher," underscoring the system's life-saving promise. The presentation was utterly sincere, designed to strike fear into the hearts of children of elderly parents and sell a sense of security to a vulnerable demographic. But the cultural reception of the ad was something its creators never could have anticipated. The line itself, delivered with such grave seriousness, proved to be irresistibly ripe for parody. Its specific, stilted cadence, the formal "I've fallen," instead of the more natural "I fell," followed by the blunt, helpless declaration, made it sound almost robotic, a strange mix of Shakespearean drama and technical malfunction. It quickly escaped the confines of its original context and was absorbed into the popular lexicon as a universal punchline for any minor inconvenience. If you dropped your pencil in school, you might groan, "I've fallen and I can't get up." If your friend stumbled on the sidewalk, the same cry would ring out. The phrase became a shorthand for any situation involving a loss of agency or a moment of comic helplessness, completely divorced from its originally terrifying meaning. This transformation was supercharged by its adoption into mainstream entertainment. the line was parodied relentlessly, becoming a staple joke on iconic shows like Seinfeld, Saturday Night Live, and Married. With children, on Seinfeld, the notoriously callous Frank Costanza suggests getting the device for George's fiancée, Susan, but only so they can use it to call for deli platters if they get hungry. Saturday Night Live built entire sketches around it, with actors like Phil Hartman hamming up the delivery to absurd degrees. These parodies didn't just mock the commercial, they celebrated its absurd staying power, turning a moment of genuine fear into a collective touchstone of comedy. The ad had achieved a rare form of cultural immortality, but it was an immortality built on laughter at its own expense. Beyond the memes and the jokes, the Life Call campaign was undeniably groundbreaking. It defined and ultimately dominated an entire genre of advertising aimed squarely at seniors and their families, a genre built on a delicate balance between morbid practicality and emotional manipulation. These ads didn't sell a lifestyle or an aspiration, they sold fear and then offered a solution. They leveraged the very real, very understandable anxiety about aging, independence, and mortality, presenting a technological lifeline that could allow older adults to maintain their autonomy while giving their loved ones peace of mind. In this sense, Life Call wasn't just selling a device, it was selling a difficult conversation, making it palatable by packaging it within a dramatic 30-second narrative. The ultimate, beautiful absurdity of the Life Call saga is that the very thing that made it an object of ridicule, that irresistibly mockable, perfectly phrased line, is also what made it one of the most successful advertising campaigns of all time. The phrase was so memorable that it kept the brand name in public consciousness for decades, far outlasting the commercial's original airtime. While people were laughing, they were also remembering. The ad achieved its primary goal through the back door of comedy, ensuring that anyone even remotely in the market for a medical alert system would think of Life Call first. It proved that in the world of advertising, there is no such thing as a bad reaction, only a reaction. Whether you shuddered at the realistic fear it portrayed or howled with laughter at its unintended humor, you never ever forgot it. And in the end, that's the most any advertiser can ever hope for. After exploring the realms of medical anxiety and fast food jingles, we arrive at a campaign that built an entire kingdom out of thin air. A medieval fantasy so perfectly absurd it had an entire nation raising their bottles in unison to a phrase that meant absolutely nothing. In 2017, as the craft beer revolution was in full swing and brands were scrambling for authenticity, Bud Light made a decidedly different bet. They didn't lean into tradition or ingredients, they invented a complete fictional universe governed by one simple rule. Loyalty to the crown is rewarded with cold Bud Light, and disloyalty is punished with banishment to the most wonderfully named dungeon in advertising history, the Pit of Misery. The world of Dilly Dilly was anachronism played to perfection. We are introduced to the opulent, somewhat goofy court of a medieval king, a ruler whose entire economy and system of justice seemed to revolve around the distribution of his favorite light beer. His subjects, a mix of knights, nobles, and jesters, address him not with solemnity, but with the cheerful, prescribed greeting of Dilly Dilly. The king, in turn, bestows his greatest honor upon those who please him, not gold or land, but a cold, sweaty bottle of Bud Light presented with the gravitas of a holy grail. The tone is neither serious parody nor outright slapstick. It exists in a brilliant middle ground of committed silliness, where actors deliver ridiculous lines with Shakespearean earnestness. The internal logic is airtight in its own bizarre way, creating a setting that felt both completely unexpected for a mass-market beer and instantly, irresistibly engaging. The true stroke of genius, however, was the treatment of dissent. When a character inevitably presents the king with a competing, inferior beer, a clever stand-in for Bud Light's real-world rivals, the punishment is swift and severe. The king's face falls in profound disappointment. He doesn't order an execution, he issues a far more terrifying decree. With a dramatic point of his finger, he condemns the offender to the pit of misery, a phrase delivered with such solemn finality that it becomes immediately iconic. We are then treated to a shot of the pit itself, a muddy hole where a lone, miserable soul is trapped, forever separated from the joy and refreshment of the kingdom above. It was a hilarious, over-the-top metaphor for brand loyalty that everyone could understand, and at the heart of this entire constructed universe was the phrase itself, dilly dilly. The words were pure nonsense, a blank slate onto which viewers could project any meaning they wanted. This was its ultimate power. Because it had no definition, it couldn't be wrong. It was simply a password, a signifier of membership in the joke. It transformed from a royal greeting in a commercial into a universal toast in bars, a cheer at sporting events, and a general exclamation of approval across the internet. Bud Light didn't just create a catchphrase, they engineered a shared cultural moment, an inside joke that they happily invited the entire country to join. The campaign's success lay in this feeling of inclusion. Saying dilly dilly wasn't about advertising a product, it was about participating in a bit of collective fun, a moment of light-hearted absurdity that everyone was in on. In a world of increasingly targeted and divisive advertising, Bud Light built a quirky, harmless kingdom where the only requirement for citizenship was a willingness to play along, proving that sometimes the strongest brand loyalty is forged not in reality, but in the most delightfully absurd of fantasies. From the feudal beer fantasies of dilly dilly, we are transported to a windswept hilltop where financial desperation takes a surprisingly cultured turn. For decades, the otherwise dry and complex world of structured settlements and annuity advances was dominated by a single, unforgettable, and utterly absurd campaign from J.G. Wentworth. While the company ran many ads, one version stands above the rest as a perfect symphony of the bizarre. A diverse crowd of ordinary people standing proudly on a grassy hill, throwing their heads back to belt out a desperate plea in perfect, powerful operatic harmony. It's my money. And I need it now. The sheer incongruity of the ad is its foundational genius. Structured settlements are typically the domain of sober lawyers and complicated paperwork, a process about as exciting as watching paint dry. J.G. Wentworth's masterstroke was to take this mundane financial transaction and stage it as a high-drama musical event. The ad opens not in a sterile office, but in the great outdoors with a sweeping crane shot that makes this gathering of frustrated annuity holders look like the final scene in a major motion picture. The participants aren't portrayed as desperate or down on their luck. They are triumphant, a unified chorus rising up against the frustrating delay of their own finances. They are dressed in casual, everyday clothes, sweaters, windbreakers, jeans, making the transition into full-throated opera singers even more jarring and hilarious. The ad takes a feeling of intense personal frustration and transforms it into a collective, almost celebratory anthem of impatience. This bizarre fusion of high art and immediate financial need created a jingle of almost supernatural memorability. The phrase itself is a work of brutal, beautiful efficiency. "It's my money" establishes an undeniable right of ownership, a fundamental claim that no one can argue with. "And I need it now" is the raw, emotional payoff, a demand for immediate gratification that anyone who has ever waited for a paycheck can viscerally understand. Setting this blunt demand to the sophisticated, soaring strains of opera, complete with a professional soprano hitting a breathtaking high note on the word "now," lifts the entire commercial into the realm of the sublime absurd. It's a moment that should not work, a combination of concepts that have no business being together, and yet it coalesces into something uniquely powerful and incredibly effective. The campaign's success was not just in its humor, but in its strategic branding. Before J.G. Wentworth, the industry was virtually invisible to the general public. They needed a way to explain their complex service in the simplest terms possible and make their phone number unforgettable. The operatic ads did both. The core message was boiled down to its absolute essence. If you have a structured settlement but you need a lump sum of cash immediately, call this number. The jingle didn't just make you remember the ad, it burned the company's solution and its phone number into the collective consciousness of America. The 877 Cash Now tagline became as ingrained as any childhood rhyme, a number you could recall even if you had no idea what a structured settlement was. Ultimately, the J.G. Wentworth opera ads achieved a rare form of advertising alchemy. They took a service that was inherently about financial strain and uncertainty and made it feel empowering, communal, and even fun. They transformed a plea for help into a victory cry. In doing so, they didn't just sell a financial product, they created a shared cultural moment that transcended its purpose. Long after the ad stopped airing, the phrase endures, a testament to the power of leaning fully into the absurd to make the complicated not just understandable but unforgettable. While the operatic theatrics of J.G. Wentworth provided a surreal soundtrack for financial need, the world of direct response television had already crowned its undisputed king decades earlier, a man who didn't need a chorus or a grassy hill to hold an audience spellbound. He needed only a countertop, a perfectly browned chicken, and an almost magical command of the English language. To speak of absurd American commercials is to pay homage to the legendary Ron Popeil and his magnum opus, the Showtime rotisserie oven. Popeil wasn't just a salesman, he was a televised shaman, a master of ceremony who transformed the simple act of cooking a chicken into a mesmerizing hour-long spectacle of promises, possibilities, and perfectly delivered catchphrases. The infomercial was a masterclass in controlled, building excitement. It would open with Popeil himself, impeccably dressed, standing before a kitchen set that was both familiar and fantastical. His demeanor was calm, confident, and avuncular. He wasn't a distant celebrity. He was your incredibly knowledgeable friend who had just discovered the secret to perfect living. And then the show would begin. The centerpiece was always the chicken. He would place a raw, seasoned bird onto the spit rod with a ceremonial flourish, slide it into the gleaming oven, and then, with a look directly into the camera, he would deliver the line that would become his eternal legacy: "Set it." And forget it, this phrase was pure alchemy. It was a 5-word poem that promised a future free from anxiety and effort. It wasn't just about cooking, it was about liberation. It sold the dream of a perfectly managed life where delicious, healthy meals happened automatically, leaving you free to pursue more important things, all thanks to this gleaming chrome appliance. But the true, absurd genius of the Showtime pitch was its relentless escalation. Just as the viewer was marveling at the rotating chicken, its skin beginning to glisten with rendered fat, Popeil would hit them with a classic hook that defined an entire genre of advertising. But wait. There's more. This wasn't a throwaway line, it was a narrative cliffhanger. It was a promise that the initial miracle of the rotisserie was merely the opening act. He would then launch into a dizzying demonstration of the oven's hidden versatility. It could bake bread, it could roast vegetables on this special little tray. It could even cook a meatloaf. Each new feature was presented not as an added bonus, but as a staggering revelation, as if he himself was just as surprised and delighted by the machine's capabilities as we were. The presentation reached its peak with a parade of free gifts. This was where the infomercial truly ascended into the realm of art. The purchase of a Showtime rotisserie wasn't complete without a cascade of additional products, all included at no extra cost. Popeil would showcase these items, often a set of knives, a recipe book, special tongs with the same reverence he showed the main appliance. The value proposition became overwhelming, a tidal wave of stuff that made the initial price seem like the deal of a lifetime. The entire production was a perfectly engineered psychological journey, moving from the initial wow of the cooking chicken, through the building excitement of additional features, and finally to the euphoric climax of getting what felt like an entire kitchen's worth of tools for the price of one. Ron Popeil's legacy is that of a true pioneer. He didn't just sell products, he invented a form of entertainment. He understood that to keep someone watching an hour-long commercial, you had to give them a show. He was a storyteller, a demonstrator, and a consummate performer who turned the act of watching someone cook into compelling, must-see television. His smooth, practiced delivery and iconic phrases became part of the cultural fabric, defining the very essence of direct response marketing for generations. He proved that with enough confidence, a compelling demonstration, and the perfect, absurdly simple promise of a worry-free life, you could indeed sell anything, even if the ultimate product was nothing more than the beautiful, rotating, and unforgettable dream of a perfectly cooked chicken. After witnessing the epic operatics of financial liberation and the homely miracles of rotisserie cooking, we now turn to a campaign that proved you didn't need a grand chorus or a revolutionary appliance to capture the nation's heart. Sometimes all you needed was one very small, very opinionated dog. In the late 1990s, as the dot-com bubble was inflating and pop culture was craving a new kind of celebrity, Taco Bell unleashed a marketing force that was furry, feisty, and utterly unforgettable. The talking Chihuahua, a mascot whose only line of dialogue would become one of the most iconic phrases of the decade. The premise of the ads was beautifully, brilliantly simple. Each commercial was a miniature narrative, a slice-of-life vignette that just happened to feature a remarkably articulate canine. The Chihuahua, with his large, expressive eyes and surprisingly nuanced personality, was usually found in a mundane situation, riding in a car, hanging out in a living room, or simply gazing longingly out a window. The human characters around him would be discussing something completely unrelated to fast food, often their own personal problems or desires, and then, with perfect comedic timing, the camera would zoom in on the dog's face. He'd tilt his head, fix the audience with a look of pure, unadulterated craving, and deliver his signature line in a charmingly squeaky, slightly accented voice, "Yo quiero Taco Bell." The phrase, which simply translates to "I want Taco Bell," was delivered not as a shout but as a confident, matter-of-fact declaration of need. The absurdity was palpable and perfect. This was a dog who didn't want a bone or a squeaky toy. He wanted a cheesy gordita crunch, and he wasn't afraid to say so. The public's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The Chihuahua, often referred to by the name Gidget, was an instant superstar. She transcended the role of a mere advertising mascot to become a genuine pop culture icon. Her face was everywhere, plastered on a seemingly endless avalanche of merchandise that ranged from the predictable, like T-shirts and stuffed animals, to the truly bizarre, including talking keychains, fishing lures, and even a series of direct-to-video movies. The phrase, "Yo quiero Taco Bell," was repeated in school cafeterias, office spaces, and comedy sketches, its meaning understood by millions of Americans who may have never taken a single Spanish lesson. The campaign was a masterstroke in brand rejuvenation, successfully shaking off Taco Bell's image as a late-night drunk food destination and repositioning it as a fun, irreverent, and trendy choice for a new generation. The Chihuahua wasn't selling food, he was selling a personality, and the brand gladly adopted it. However, this immense popularity was not without its complications. Almost from the beginning, the campaign found itself at the center of a heated cultural debate. Advocacy groups, including the National Hispanic Media Coalition, criticized the ads for perpetuating negative stereotypes. Their argument centered on the use of a broken Spanish phrase delivered by a dog, a portrayal they felt reduced the Spanish language and, by extension, Hispanic people, to a simple-minded punchline for a mass audience. They contended that the humor was derived from a place of marginalization, making a cultural identity the butt of a joke crafted by a major corporation. Taco Bell and their ad agency defended the campaign, stating the dog's character was intended to be endearing and that the phrase was meant to be a celebration of the brand's Mexican-inspired menu, not a mockery of a language or culture. They pointed to the dog's clear intelligence and charm as evidence of positive representation. For a time, the sheer force of the Chihuahua's popularity seemed to outweigh the controversy. The ads continued to air and the merchandise continued to fly off the shelves, but the criticisms created a persistent undercurrent of unease that the brand could not fully shake. The world was changing and cultural sensitivity was becoming an increasingly important consideration for major brands. The campaign's eventual retirement in the early 2000s was likely due to a combination of factors: the natural fatigue that comes with any long-running advertising concept, the desire to innovate, and perhaps a quiet acknowledgement that the cultural landscape had shifted enough that the ad's humor was now more problematic than profitable. The legacy of the Taco Bell Chihuahua is therefore a complex one, a testament to the incredible power of a simple, absurd idea to capture the public imagination, but also a sobering reminder that even the most beloved and successful campaigns exist within a broader social context and must eventually answer for the messages they send, whether intentionally or not. If Ron Popeil taught us to find majesty in a rotating chicken, then Nabisco's Easy Cheese campaign found pure, unadulterated ecstasy in a can of pressurized dairy product. This was advertising that looked at a sprayable cheese substance and saw not a questionable foodstuff, but a moment of high art, a spectacle of pure delight. The commercials for Easy Cheese are masterpieces of enthusiastic overstatement, presenting the simple act of depositing cheese onto a cracker as an event of such profound joy that it required its own dramatic soundtrack, slow-motion photography, and the celebratory energy of a fireworks display. The ads typically open on a scene of eager anticipation. A family gathers around a table, their faces beaming with expectation, as if they are about to witness a magic trick rather than the preparation of a snack. The camera focuses intently on the iconic can, held aloft with the reverence typically reserved for a precious artifact. Then, the moment of truth arrives. A finger presses down on the nozzle, and with a satisfying hiss, a perfect, creamy swirl of orange cheese begins to erupt. This is where the directing genius kicks in. The action immediately shifts into slow motion, capturing every glorious, undulating loop as it spirals gracefully onto a waiting cracker. The cheese doesn't just land, it pirouettes. Soaring, orchestral music swells on the soundtrack, transforming the kitchen into a concert hall and the snack into a symphony. A narrator, his voice dripping with gravitas, would then declare the event for what it truly was. It's a cheese event. The sheer absurdity of the production is what makes it so brilliant and so unforgettable. They took a process that is, in reality, vaguely industrial and slightly ridiculous, and through the power of editing and music, made it feel like a monumental achievement in culinary engineering. This wasn't just about making a snack, it was about selling an experience of unapologetic fun. The commercials delighted in showcasing the playful possibilities of the product. They didn't just show people neatly topping crackers, they showed kids and adults with the spirit of kids using the can to draw smiley faces on their food, write messages on celery sticks, or, in the ultimate act of processed cheese abandon, spraying it directly into their open mouths from a comical distance. This was the core of the sales pitch. Easy Cheese wasn't food, it was a toy. It was permission to play with your food, to engage in a little bit of controlled, creamy chaos. It celebrated the joy of the gimmick itself, acknowledging that the novelty of the delivery system was just as important as the taste. In a world of serious gourmet aspirations, Easy Cheese was a welcome, winking embrace of the silly and the synthetic. As a perfect artifact of 1980s and 90s food culture, Easy Cheese advertising embodies a specific, glorious kind of exuberance. This was an era before wellness culture and foodieism, a time when convenience and fun were the primary selling points for a new product. It was an age of unabashed artificiality where the future was bright, orange, and available at the push of a button. The commercials didn't try to convince you that this was a fine artisanal cheddar. They knew exactly what it was and they loved it for it. They sold a vision of effortless, shared joy, where the simplest of actions could be transformed into a moment of family connection and pure, uncomplicated happiness. The campaign stands as a monument to the idea that marketing isn't always about convincing you of a product's inherent quality. Sometimes it's about celebrating its unique, weird, and wonderful spirit, convincing you that the most memorable meal isn't always the most sophisticated, but the one that makes you smile the widest. After celebrating the synthetic joy of sprayable cheese, we find ourselves in a much quieter, much darker place. The pre-dawn hours of a suburban neighborhood where a different kind of dedication unfolds, one not of ecstasy but of exhaustion. This was the world of Fred the Baker, the somber, sleep-deprived hero of Dunkin' Donuts' long-running and strangely melancholic campaign, a man whose personal mantra was a weary, resigned sigh, time to make the donuts. The commercials were mini masterpieces of understated drama. They often opened in profound darkness, the only light coming from a single bedroom window or the lonely glow of a street lamp. The camera would find Fred, played with brilliant hangdog sincerity by actor Michael Vale, already in his rumpled baker's uniform, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated fatigue. He moved through a silent, sleeping world, a ghost dedicated to the singular, sacred task of preparing breakfast for the waking masses. The ads were almost entirely devoid of the high-energy pitches or cheerful jingles that defined most fast food advertising. Instead, the sound design was stark and intimate. The shuffle of Fred's feet, the sigh of a door opening, the quiet mutter of his iconic line, delivered not as a cheerful declaration but as a solemn, almost monastic vow. Time to make the donuts, he would say to himself, to his wife, or to no one at all, imbuing the production of baked goods with a dramatic weight typically reserved for epic journeys or profound personal trials. The sheer absurdity of this approach is what made it so compelling and so effective. Dunkin' Donuts took a simple, everyday process and framed it as a heroic, thankless calling. Fred wasn't just a baker, he was a guardian of the morning, a man who sacrificed his own sleep and comfort to ensure that everyone else could start their day with a fresh, warm treat. The campaign brilliantly associated the brand not with whimsy or low prices, but with an old-world sense of integrity, hard work, and an almost obsessive commitment to freshness. The unspoken message was powerful. Our donuts are so good because a tired, dedicated man literally loses sleep over them. This wasn't a product that magically appeared on shelves. It was crafted with care by someone who took his job, however mundane it might seem, deadly seriously. Fred the Baker became an unlikely but deeply relatable folk hero. In an era of increasingly glossy and artificial advertising, his authenticity was a breath of fresh air. He wasn't a cartoon character or a suave celebrity. He was every working person who has ever dragged themselves out of bed to fulfill a responsibility. His exhaustion was palpable and real, making him one of the most human characters ever created for a national ad campaign. Viewers didn't just see a commercial, they saw a reflection of their own work ethic and daily grind. He became a cultural touchstone, his catchphrase entering the lexicon as a shorthand for facing any unpleasant but necessary task. The campaign ran for an incredible 15 years, a testament to its resonant power, eventually retiring only when the concept of a single baker personally making all the donuts became logistically unbelievable even within its own charming fiction. Fred's final commercial saw him finally retiring, walking out of the bakery for the last time, only to be met by his own younger doppelganger arriving for the shift, a perfect, poignant ending for a man whose dedication was truly timeless. In the world of absurd commercials, Fred the Baker stands apart, a monument not to loud weirdness, but to the quiet, beautiful absurdity of finding profound meaning in the simple, daily act of making the donuts. While the world of advertising often celebrates the loud, the bizarre, and the surreal, true absurdity can also wear a tailored suit and speak in a soothing, reassuring tone. This brings us to a campaign that perfected a different kind of madness, not one of monsters or talking dogs, but of emotional alchemy, a masterclass in manufacturing profound sentiment from a simple, repeating formula. The MasterCard Priceless campaign, launched in 1997, presented itself as the dignified, heartwarming antithesis to the era's wacky commercials, but its true genius was an absurdity of structure, a meticulously engineered machine for manipulating feelings that became one of the most successful and instantly recognizable advertising templates of all time. The formula was deceptively simple, a rhythmic incantation broken into 3 distinct acts. The commercial would open by cataloging a series of tangible purchases, each accompanied by its specific mundane price. Tickets for 2, $50, hot dogs and drinks $15, autographed baseball $45. This first act was a grounding in reality, a straightforward accounting of a financial transaction that any viewer could understand. The second act then introduced the emotional payoff, the moment these purchased items made possible. Watching your 7-year-old son see his childhood hero hit a home run. This was the pivot, the shift from the quantitative to the qualitative. Then came the third and final act, the tagline. The orchestral score would swell, the screen would fade to the MasterCard logo, and the voiceover would deliver the killer blow, priceless. The profound absurdity of this campaign lies in its breathtaking audacity. MasterCard wasn't selling a credit card's interest rate, its rewards points, or its security features. In fact, the product itself was almost an afterthought, a mere facilitator. What they were actually selling was the idea of experience itself. The ads brilliantly reframed the credit card not as a tool for debt, but as a key that unlocked intangible, emotional treasures. It weaponized nostalgia, family bonding, and personal achievement, suggesting that these deepest human experiences were not just accessible, but purchasable, with MasterCard as your discreet and essential companion on the journey. The campaign's power was in its vagueness. It sold a feeling, an aspiration, a promise that your life, too, could be filled with these perfectly curated, priceless moments if you simply had the right piece of plastic in your wallet. This formula was so brilliantly effective because it was infinitely replicable. The template was a blank slate that could be applied to hundreds of scenarios, from a father teaching his daughter to drive to friends on a road trip to a couple renewing their wedding vows. Each iteration felt both universal and personally resonant, a tiny, 30-second movie that told a complete emotional story. The campaign achieved a rare trifecta. It was critically acclaimed, winning numerous awards. It was a commercial powerhouse, significantly boosting brand recognition and usage, and achieved genuine cultural penetration. The word priceless itself was redefined, evolving from a dictionary term into a cultural shorthand for any meaningful experience that transcended monetary value. However, such overwhelming success inevitably contained the seeds of its own undoing. The very formula that made it brilliant, its perfect, predictable structure, eventually became its greatest weakness. As the campaign stretched across decades, the once powerful emotional punches began to feel calculated, predictable, and even cliché. The rhythm became so familiar that it invited parody almost as much as it inspired sentiment. Comedians and satirists had a field day crafting their own priceless ads for absurd or mundane situations, highlighting the inherent manipulation of the format. The commercials, in their quest for universal appeal, began to feel safe, saccharine, and devoid of the authentic, messy emotions of real life. The descent into self-parody was not a failure of the idea, but a testament to its saturation. It had worked so well for so long that it became a victim of its own perfection, a once sharp blade worn down by its own relentless effectiveness. The campaign's legacy is thus a paradox, a landmark achievement in emotional advertising that ultimately became a textbook example of how even the most brilliant idea can become a prisoner of its own formula. If the world of advertising proves anything, it's that the line between memorable and deeply unsettling can be incredibly thin, a truth perfectly embodied by a campaign that attempted to sell the cutting-edge technology of internet search with one of the oldest tropes in the book, a talking baby. But this was no ordinary cooing infant. This was Baby Bob, the bizarre CGI-rendered spokes-infant for the search engine Ask Jeeves, a campaign so deeply strange it has stubbornly clung to the collective memory not for its effectiveness, but for the sheer, skin-crawling weirdness it unleashed upon an unsuspecting public. The ads themselves are a perfect time capsule of early 2000s digital ambition. Baby Bob is presented in a state of hyper-realistic unreality, a plump, diapered infant with rosy cheeks and wide, unblinking eyes sitting in a high chair or a playpen. The setup feels almost normal until he opens his mouth. Instead of a gurgle or a cry, out comes the smooth, cultured, and impossibly articulate baritone of a middle-aged man. This was no simple voiceover. The CGI animation meticulously synced the baby's lips to this sophisticated adult dialogue, creating a visceral cognitive dissonance that was impossible to ignore. Baby Bob didn't just talk, he philosophized. He delivered polished puns, witty one-liners, and thoughtful commentary on the nature of internet queries, all while maintaining the vacant, doll-like stare of a newborn. In one infamous spot, he turns to the camera and with the cadence of a seasoned late-night host quips, "I'm a baby, I can barely hold my own head up. But I can get you whatever you need on the World Wide Web. That's AskJeeves.com. You ask, it answers, it's easy." The absurdity of the premise is pushed to its breaking point, creating a commercial that feels less like an advertisement and more like a deleted scene from a particularly surreal science fiction film. The primary reaction from viewers wasn't amusement or curiosity. It was a deep, unnerving sense of the uncanny valley. This term, coined by Japanese roboticist Masahiro Mori, describes the unsettling feeling people experience when they encounter a robot or CGI figure that looks almost but not quite human. Baby Bob was the uncanny valley personified, or rather infantified. His appearance was just realistic enough to trigger our innate human recognition, but his behavior, the adult voice, the intellectual wit, the lack of natural childish movement was so profoundly wrong that it triggered a deep-seated sense of revulsion and anxiety. He wasn't cute, he was a glitch in the matrix of reality, a homunculus in a diaper that seemed to know far more than it should. This wasn't the calculated weirdness of a PuppyMonkeyBaby, which was clearly a cartoonish monster. Baby Bob existed in a much more disturbing space, masquerading as a real human infant while behaving like a tiny, trapped corporate executive. The strategic thinking behind this campaign remains one of advertising's great mysteries. Ask Jeeves was a genuinely innovative product for its time, allowing users to ask questions in plain English rather than using clunky Boolean search terms. The idea was to present the service as simple and intuitive. The leap to, and therefore a talking baby will represent this, is a logic-defying non sequitur. Perhaps the creators thought the contrast between the infant's form and adult function would be humorous and memorable, a metaphor for the service making complex technology accessible to everyone. Instead, the campaign became a textbook case of a creative concept overwhelming the product it was meant to sell. People weren't talking about the virtues of natural language search. They were talking about the profoundly creepy baby that gave them nightmares. As a result, Baby Bob is remembered not as a clever mascot for a tech pioneer, but as a true artifact of an era when CGI was new enough that marketers were desperate to use it, even if they hadn't quite figured out how to use it well. It represents a moment of unchecked experimental zeal, a bizarre detour in advertising history where a boardroom full of people looked at a rendering of a philosophizing infant and decided, yes, this is the future. While Ask Jeeves itself was eventually overshadowed by Google and faded into obscurity, the haunting image of Baby Bob with his wisecracks and dead-eyed stare endures as a perfect, creepy monument to the fact that just because you can make a CGI baby talk, it doesn't mean you ever should. But the true stroke of genius, the move that transformed a viral hit into a legitimate cultural earthquake, was the campaign that erupted in the days immediately following the Super Bowl. Old Spice didn't just let the ad speak for itself, they weaponized its absurdity in an unprecedented interactive blitz known as the Response Campaign. In a marketing first, the brand set up a war room and had Isaiah Mustafa, still in character and still shirtless, film over 180 personalized video replies to people on the internet in real time. This wasn't a pre-planned series of generic shoutouts. It was a live, improvisational comedy session fueled by direct audience interaction. The videos themselves were masterpieces of surreal, rapid-fire engagement. Mustafa would respond directly to tweets and comments from a wildly diverse range of people, from celebrities like Alyssa Milano and Ellen DeGeneres to everyday users and even competing brands. The brilliance was in the commitment to the bit. If someone tweeted about their love of burritos, Isaiah would be suddenly holding a massive burrito, pontificating on its virtues. If a user asked a question about their love life, he'd be perched on a horse, offering bizarrely specific romantic advice. He proposed marriage on behalf of fans, offered to be a stand-in boyfriend, and delivered motivational speeches while casually producing diamonds or sailing on a miniature yacht, all while maintaining the character's signature deadpan gravitas. The production value was shockingly high for a project with such a frantic turnaround, seamlessly incorporating the visual gags and impossible transitions that made the original ad so memorable. This real-time response loop created a self-perpetuating viral machine. Every time someone received a video, they would immediately share it with their own audience, generating a new wave of excitement and prompting countless others to flood Old Spice's social media feeds in the hopes of being chosen next. It turned passive viewers into active participants in the joke, creating a sense of communal ownership over the campaign. The internet became a gigantic game of tag, and everyone wanted to be it by Old Spice. This wasn't just advertising, it was performance art on a global scale, a demonstration that a brand could be nimble, hilarious, and deeply engaged with its audience in a way that felt authentic and wildly entertaining. The results of this audacious stunt were nothing short of historic. The response videos garnered tens of millions of views, and the campaign dominated the online conversation for weeks, achieving a level of sustained buzz that most brands only dream of. More importantly, it had a direct and massive impact on the bottom line. In the months following the campaign, Old Spice sales skyrocketed, with body wash sales increasing by over 100%. The campaign didn't just sell deodorant, it completely revitalized a dusty, aging brand, repositioning it as the cool, clever choice for a new generation. It set a new, incredibly high bar for what digital brand engagement could look like, proving that the most powerful marketing doesn't talk at an audience, but with them, transforming customers into a cast of millions for a wonderfully absurd story that everyone was thrilled to be a part of. But if Baby Bob represented the unsettling side of absurdity, the next entry on our list demonstrates how unvarnished, high-intensity aggression could be channeled into a thing of terrifying beauty. We are, of course, entering the vortex of Vince offers sham while pitch, a world where the humble act of cleaning a spill is transformed into a high-stakes gladiatorial battle, and the pitchman himself is your loud, slightly unhinged commander leading the charge. Vince Offer, who would later achieve even greater fame with the slap chop, didn't just sell products. He conducted televised assaults on the viewer's senses, and the sham wow infomercial stands as his magnum opus of controlled chaos. The ad is a masterclass in relentless, high-pressure salesmanship. It typically opens with Vince already in mid-stride, talking a mile a minute, his voice a percussive instrument of pure persuasion. Dressed in a dark suit and often sweating under the studio lights, he holds up the blue and white striped chamois cloth, not as a simple towel, but as a technological marvel. His delivery is a rapid-fire barrage of claims, questions, and commands, leaving no room for the viewer to breathe, let alone consider the actual physics of absorption. He doesn't ask if you'd like to see a demonstration. He tells you you're about to witness a revolution. The camera work is just as aggressive as his persona, featuring extreme, shuddering close-ups of the sham wow's texture, quick cuts that mimic the frantic energy of his speech, and dramatic, slow-motion pours of liquid to maximize the visual impact. Then comes the main event, the demonstrations. This is where the absurdity reaches its glorious peak. Vince doesn't just dab at a small spill, he unleashes a tsunami in a studio. He'll pour an entire 2-liter bottle of soda onto a hard surface, a truly shocking amount of liquid, and with a few confident swipes of the sham wow, the mess vanishes. The surface is left perfectly, impossibly dry. He'll then wring the towel out into a clear container, dramatically showcasing the astounding volume of liquid it has captured, a visual that never fails to elicit a gasp. He compares it to a paper towel with utter contempt, mocking its inferiority while his creation soaks up an entire pitcher of red wine without leaving a stain. The presentation is so over the top, so dripping with theatrical triumph, that you start to believe this piece of fabric might actually be the most important invention since the wheel. Vince's palpable intensity sells the idea that this isn't just about cleaning. It's about winning a war against messiness itself, and he is providing you with the ultimate weapon. This carefully constructed reality, however, would eventually be punctured by a layer of real-life absurdity that was even stranger than the commercials. Vince offers carefully crafted persona as the king of as seen on TV was severely damaged by a series of off-screen legal troubles that became public spectacle. He was arrested in 2009 after an alleged altercation with a prostitute in Florida, a scandal that provided endless fodder for late-night comedians and instantly reframed his aggressive on-screen character in a much darker, more cynical light. Furthermore, he faced a lawsuit from the makers of the sham wow for allegedly failing to pay them their full share of profits, and was later sued for assault by his own hairstylist. The Federal Trade Commission also eventually stepped in, fining the company behind sham wow for making unsubstantiated claims about the product's absorbency and durability. These real-world controversies created a surreal feedback loop. The Vince offer on screen was a hyperbolic character, a caricature of a pushy salesman that we were all in on the joke with. But the Vince offer in the courtroom was a real person facing genuinely seedy and bizarre allegations. This collision of fiction and reality didn't just undermine the product's credibility, it retroactively made the commercials even more fascinating. The aggressive, slightly threatening energy that was once hilarious now felt vaguely prophetic. The sham wow infomercial thus endures not only as a perfect example of a specific, loud era of direct response television, but also as a complex cultural artifact, a testament to how the most absurd commercials can sometimes be upstaged by the even more unbelievable truths lurking behind the screen. While the world of advertising often shouts for attention, the next campaign on our list proved that true power could reside in a quiet, knowing smirk and a whispered suggestion. In a landscape of frantic demonstrations and desperate pleas, Dos Equis executed a masterclass in sophisticated absurdity by introducing the world to the most interesting man in the world. This was not a mascot, it was a meticulously crafted archetype, a character so impossibly cool, so shrouded in mystique that he didn't need to sell the beer. The beer was simply fortunate enough to be associated with him. The commercials were miniature works of poetic hyperbole. They presented a suave, silver-haired gentleman, often found in an exotic locale like a dimly lit bodega or a bustling foreign plaza, surrounded by beautiful, captivated people. He was the center of gravity in every room he entered, but the true genius was in the voiceover, a rich, sonorous baritone that would narrate a series of utterly impossible, gloriously absurd facts about his life. These weren't just boasts, they were mythical vignettes presented as simple biographical details. Sharks have a week dedicated to him. His beard alone has experienced more than a lesser man's entire body. He once had an awkward moment just to see how it felt. Each line was delivered with deadpan seriousness, treating the most outlandish claims as settled, mundane fact. This commitment to the character's own legend was what made the campaign so brilliant and so funny. It never winked at the audience. It asked you to believe, if only for 30 seconds, in a world where one man could indeed live a life so preposterously epic. The campaign's crowning achievement, however, was its iconic tagline. After a montage of these unbelievable feats, the camera would settle on the man himself. He would turn, look directly into the lens with a gaze that was both inviting and impenetrable, and deliver the killer line with a calm, almost casual confidence. "I don't always drink beer, but when I do, I prefer Dos Equis." The line was a work of marketing perfection. It framed the act of choosing Dos Equis not as a common habit, but as a deliberate, rare event, a conscious selection made by a man of impeccable taste. It was the ultimate soft sell, dripping with an aura of exclusive sophistication. It immediately separated the brand from the loud, party-centric advertising of its competitors, suggesting that their beer wasn't for the masses. It was for the discerning individual, the person who, like the most interesting man, operated on a different plane of existence altogether. This potent combination of hyperbolic myth-making and a perfectly understated pitch line proved to be a cultural atom bomb. The "I don't always" formulation became one of the most prolific and enduring meme templates in internet history. It was adapted for thousands of jokes, celebrating everything from mundane daily struggles to niche pop culture references, ensuring the campaign's relevance continued to grow long after the commercials stopped airing. For Dos Equis, a brand that had languished in relative obscurity in the crowded import beer market, the impact was transformative. The campaign didn't just increase sales, it completely reinvented the brand's identity, gifting it an aura of mystery, wit, and effortless cool that its competitors could not match. It demonstrated that in a world of shouted claims, the most compelling message is sometimes a quiet, absurd, and utterly confident suggestion, proving that the most interesting choice isn't always the loudest, but the one that makes you lean in closer to hear what it has to say. From the sophisticated myth-making of Dos Equis, we plummet headfirst into a world of cheerful cartoon cannibalism and sugary, frosted reincarnation. The early 2000s gifted us a commercial campaign for Kellogg's Pop-Tarts so bizarre in its internal logic that it remains a surreal touchstone for an entire generation. This was the era of Milton, an anthropomorphic, rectangular Pop-Tart with stick-figure limbs and a relentlessly upbeat attitude, whose sole purpose in his animated existence was to be enthusiastically devoured by his human friends, all set to a jingle so aggressively catchy it could bypass the critical thinking part of your brain entirely. The premise of each ad was a darkly hilarious ritual. The scene would typically open on a group of kids, often looking bored or in need of a snack. Milton would then pop into the frame, his frosted surface gleaming, a wide, cheerful grin plastered on his pastry face. He wasn't just a sentient food item, he was an active participant in his own consumption, a willing volunteer for consumption, with an eager cry of his signature line, "Gotta have my pops." He would leap directly into a toaster. The animation would show him inside, blissfully enjoying the heating process as his frosting bubbled and his edges crisped. He would then pop up, perfectly toasted, and proceed to enthusiastically launch himself into the waiting mouth of one of the children, often with a final, gleeful shout as he was eaten whole. The ads always ended with the same visual punchline. The child, now satisfied, would burp, and a tiny, ghost-like version of Milton would float out of their mouth, giving a cheerful wave before presumably returning to his toaster for the next inevitable cycle of consumption and rebirth. The absurdity of this cycle is what made it so unforgettable. This wasn't a standard product demonstration. It was a full-blown mythology built around a breakfast pastry. Milton was a cheerful martyr in a world where the laws of life, death, and thermodynamics were dictated by the need for a quick, sugary snack. The humor was both surreal and slightly dark, presenting a character who not only accepted his gruesome fate but seemed to derive genuine joy from it. This wasn't a tragedy, it was a symbiotic relationship of snack-based ecstasy. The world building was incredibly specific and weirdly compelling, creating a universe where sentient food was not only real but seemed to have no other ambition than to be consumed, only to return again for the next adventure. It was a premise that felt both wildly imaginative and completely unhinged, a perfect product of the era's willingness to embrace the strange in children's advertising. At the heart of this madness was the jingle, a three-word mantra delivered with such explosive enthusiasm that it became impossible to dislodge from your memory. "Gotta have my pops" was less a musical phrase and more of a neurological command, a perfectly engineered earworm that encapsulated the entire campaign's feeling of urgent, insatiable craving. It was simple, repetitive, and shouted with a conviction that made you believe you, too, desperately needed your pops at that very moment. The combination of this addictive audio cue and the hypnotically bizarre animation created a one-two punch of marketing hypnosis that was incredibly effective on its target audience of children and teens. For those who grew up with these commercials, Milton achieved a rare cult status. He became more than a mascot. He was a shared cultural reference point for a specific kind of weirdness. The ads were talked about on playgrounds, parodied in school skits, and remembered with a mixture of nostalgia and bewilderment years later. They represented a time when kid-focused advertising wasn't afraid to be flat-out strange, to present a concept that made zero logical sense but had an undeniable emotional and comedic logic all its own. The campaign was eventually retired, perhaps as cultural sensitivities shifted away from the idea of a happy character committing repeated pastry suicide, but the ghost of Milton endures. He remains a deliciously absurd monument to the fact that sometimes the most effective way to sell a product isn't to explain it, but to build a wonderfully weird little world around it and invite everyone in for a bite. While the world of Muppets has always been a delightful refuge of controlled chaos and gentle anarchy, few characters embody that spirit quite like the culinary maestro of mispronunciation, the Swedish chef. In a stroke of marketing genius, Bounty paper towels saw in this beloved buffoon not just a source of comedy, but the perfect chaotic neutral agent to demonstrate their product's ultimate strength. The resulting commercial is a masterclass in leveraging pre-existing affection for a character to deliver a product message with absolute clarity and tremendous fun. The ad drops us directly into the chef's kitchen, a familiar whirlwind of flying ingredients, bubbling pots, and the percussive soundtrack of cooking utensils being used more as weapons than tools. The chef himself is in his element, balking his way through a recipe that likely only exists in his magnificent, messy mind. He's a force of nature, a whirlwind of flour and fervor, and as anyone who has ever watched his segment knows, a mess of epic proportions is not just likely, it is guaranteed. And right on cue, disaster strikes. A pot overboils, a ladle flings gravy across the counter, a whole fish makes a break for freedom, sliding across a pristine surface. The chaos is beautiful, predictable, and completely engaging. This is where the magic happens. Instead of panicking, the Swedish chef remains the picture of unflappable competence. With a cheerful exclamation that sounds something like "Bork, bork, bork," He reaches not for a dish rag or a sponge, but for the roll of bounty. What follows is a demonstration so efficient it's almost balletic. With a quick rip and a single decisive swipe, the entire mess vanishes. The counter is clean, the crisis is averted, and the chef can return to his culinary madness without missing a single beat. The product's key claim, quick absorption, isn't just stated. It's shown in the most extreme, hilarious, and believable laboratory imaginable, the kitchen of a Muppet who treats cooking like a contact sport. The true absurd genius of this crossover lies in its perfect alignment of character and product. Bounty didn't just slap a celebrity face on their towel. They found a character whose entire persona was synonymous with the very problem their product was designed to solve. The Swedish chef is mess. He is the source of the spill, the creator of the stain. By having him be the one to effortlessly clean it up, the ad delivers a message of unparalleled confidence. If a paper towel can handle the hurricane of havoc that is the Swedish chef, then it can unquestionably handle your clumsy coffee spill or your child's overturned juice box. It's a demonstration that feels authentic precisely because it's so over the top. The humor and nostalgia of seeing a beloved Muppet disarming his own brand of chaos makes the sales pitch feel less like an advertisement and more like a delightful 30-second sketch that you just happen to learn something from. It's a brilliant reminder that the most effective advertising often doesn't feel like advertising at all, but rather a natural, entertaining extension of a story we already know and love. Yet another campaign that understood the raw, persuasive power of sheer, unapologetic force. The Capital One, Vikings, or Barbarians series took the concept of aggressive marketing to its most literal and absurd conclusion. This was not a commercial that asked for your business. It invaded your living room, slammed its fist on the table, and demanded to know what was in your wallet, a question delivered not with curiosity, but with the intimidating force of a rhetorical threat. The premise of these ads was a masterpiece of high-concept weirdness. A scene of tranquil, everyday commerce would be abruptly shattered by the arrival of a horde of rampaging Vikings or barbarians, bursting through the doors of a boutique or a small restaurant. These were not subtle negotiators. They were agents of pure, theatrical chaos, clad in furs and armor, their faces smeared with war paint, their voices roaring with gleeful destruction. The cause of their fury was always the same. The establishment dared to not accept the Capital One credit card. The owner or a hapless customer would try to pay with a rival card, only to have it snapped in two by a snarling barbarian chieftain. This would be the cue for the pillaging to begin, with the marauders overturning tables, terrifying patrons, and generally reducing the place to rubble, all because of a minor inconvenience at the point of sale. The sheer disproportion of the response was the entire joke. It was a violent, over-the-top metaphor for the frustration of having your preferred payment method rejected, amplified to apocalyptic levels. The true absurd genius of the campaign was in its casting and its tagline. The barbarians, rather than being genuinely frightening, were portrayed with a kind of jovial, over-the-top zeal. They clearly loved their job, relishing the chaos they caused on behalf of their financial overlords. Their leader, often played by actors like David Addison or James McCaffrey, would then step forward, his work of destruction complete, to deliver the iconic line directly to the camera with a menacing smirk, "What's in your wallet?" The line was a work of brutal efficiency. It wasn't a question about the contents of your billfold, it was a challenge. It implied that if you didn't have a Capital One card in there, you were vulnerable, unprepared for the modern world's financial barbarians. It framed the card not as a convenience, but as a shield, a necessary tool for survival in a merciless commercial landscape. This bizarre, threatening scenario was a calculated and incredibly effective gambit in the brutally competitive credit card wars of the early 2000s. In a market saturated with nearly identical offers for low APRA and airline miles, Capital One needed a way to cut through the noise. They chose memorability above all else. The ads were impossible to ignore and even harder to forget. They created immense brand awareness by associating their name with a feeling of raw, uncompromising power. The message was clear: this is not a weak, timid financial institution. This is a card for conquerors, for people who demand acceptance and are prepared to back it up. The campaign ran for over a decade, a testament to its potency, proving that sometimes the most direct path to a consumer's memory is through a simulated Viking invasion, a stark reminder that in the economy of attention, a little controlled absurdity can be the most powerful currency of all. While the Vikings of Capital One were busy storming boutiques over credit card disputes, a much smaller, fuzzier icon was facing a crisis of his own, one that played out not with the clash of steel but with the gentle hum of bee wings and the terrifying prospect of a sugary disappointment. For generations, the Honey Nut Cheerios bee had been a steady, reliable presence in American advertising, a cheerful ambassador for a simple, sweet cereal. But in a specific, wonderfully bizarre commercial, this beloved mascot was pushed to his absolute emotional and physical limit, experiencing a journey of such high drama that it would make most action movie plots seem tame by comparison. The ad opens on a quiet, almost somber note. We find our bee friend looking dejected, his wings drooping, his antennae slumped. His honey pot is empty, his world is devoid of sweetness, and his entire purpose feels lost. The cause of this profound melancholy is revealed through a simple, devastating line: the cereal is gone. It's a moment of genuine pathos for a cartoon insect, setting a stakes that feel absurdly high for a breakfast commercial. But then, a glimmer of hope, another character, often a young boy, delivers the miraculous news with a quiet reverence. It's back. These two words act like an electric shock to the bee's entire system. His despair instantly evaporates, replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated euphoria. This is where the commercial shifts from a simple character moment into a full-blown epic. The bee doesn't just politely fly to the kitchen. He launches himself into the air with the explosive force of a rocket, buzzing with a manic, uncontrollable energy. His flight path is not one of graceful purpose, but of chaotic, joyous abandon. He zigs, he zags, he spirals through the air in a golden blur, completely overwhelmed by the glorious news that his raison d'etre has returned. The animation captures this not as a simple flight, but as a turbulent, high-speed journey, a visual representation of a heart soaring so fast it might just beat right out of its chest. And then the peril. In his ecstatic, out-of-control flight, the bee fails to navigate a simple turn. He careens directly toward a wall, a crash imminent. The music swells with a note of danger, and for a split second, we genuinely fear for the safety of this animated insect. His moment of ultimate joy is about to be cut short by a tragic, plaster-based demise. But in a moment of sheer, brilliant absurdity, salvation comes from the most iconic source possible, the cereal itself. The bee's tiny legs flail out, and at the very last second, he catches himself hooking onto the giant, floating yellow letter O from the Cheerios logo. He dangles there for a moment, suspended, saved by the very thing he loves most. He catches his breath, his wide eyes blinking in relief before pulling himself to safety on the top of the letter. The crisis is averted, the journey is complete, the bee is home. The genius of this miniature saga lies in its breathtaking commitment to the bit. The ad applies the narrative weight of a feature film to a 30-second spot about processed oats and honey. It's a masterclass in building rich, character-driven stories around the simplest of products. We aren't just watching a bee, we are witnessing a character with clear desires, palpable emotions, and tangible struggles. His near-death experience isn't played for laughs, it's played for genuine suspense, making his eventual salvation feel like a true victory. This approach transformed the Honey Nut Cheerios bee from a two-dimensional logo into a relatable protagonist. His quest wasn't just for cereal, it was for happiness, for purpose, for the simple, profound joy that comes from a favorite flavor returning to the pantry. These commercials built a lasting emotional connection by treating their mascot's journey with a level of sincerity and drama that was both ridiculous and utterly effective, reminding us that sometimes the most compelling stories are the ones told not about kings and warriors, but about a very small, very enthusiastic bee who just really loves his breakfast. But if the Honey Nut Cheerios bee showed us the power of a single-minded, joyful quest, Burger King decided to take that concept and filter it through a much darker, much weirder lens. Just 1 year after the reign of the subservient chicken began, another fast food giant decided that the best way to sell chicken was not through a mascot, but through a full-blown musical manifesto of poultry-based paranoia. This was the era of the KFC famous bowls, and the commercial created to sell them was so bafflingly sincere in its own bizarre logic that it became an instant classic of the genre, a perfect storm of earnest rapping and culinary chaos that asked a simple, haunting question. Why eat a boring old chicken dinner when you could instead experience a symphony of flavors all mixed together in a single glorious bowl? The ad, often referred to as the rapper, is a 30-second descent into a very specific kind of madness. It opens not on a product shot, but on a man standing in a stark, white void, a look of intense concentration on his face. He is not a professional rapper, he is everyman, a regular guy who has been so profoundly moved by his lunch that he has been compelled to express his feelings through the power of rhyme. He begins to rap, his delivery a mesmerizing blend of awkward cadence and absolute, unwavering conviction. The lyrics are a straightforward, almost clinical deconstruction of the bowl's ingredients. We got potato and gravy, a little bit of corn, a 3-cheese blend, and the chicken on top. You know it's stacked. That's how we do it. That's how we do it, yeah. There is no metaphor, no poetic flair, just a man listing components with the rhythmic intensity of a revolutionary chant. The true, jaw-dropping absurdity of the ad, however, is its visual presentation. As the man passionately describes each layer of the famous bowl, the camera performs a dramatic, slow-motion crane shot directly down into the bowl itself. But this is no appetizing food glamour shot. Instead, we are treated to a surreal, almost dystopian landscape. Mashed potatoes become a white, lumpy plain. Gravy oozes like a viscous lava flow. Kernels of corn roll into place like golden boulders. Shredded cheese descends from the heavens like a blizzard of orange snow. And finally, chunks of fried chicken crash land onto the topography like meteors from a distant, delicious galaxy. The entire presentation feels less like a description of a meal and more like the genesis of a new, edible planet, a culinary big bang set to the world's most serious, offbeat rap. This bizarre fusion of earnest performance and surreal visual metaphor created a commercial that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't trying to be cool or funny, it was trying to be epic, and in doing so, it became both hilarious and utterly unforgettable. The ad was instantly meme-ified, with the rapper's deadpan delivery and the oddly haunting phrase, a 3-cheese blend, being endlessly parodied and remixed online. It tapped into a very specific early internet sensibility where things could become popular not for being good in a traditional sense, but for being so authentically, profoundly strange. The campaign was a viral sensation, not because it was designed to be, but because its sheer, unvarnished weirdness was a magnet for cultural commentary. It proved that sometimes the most effective way to cut through the noise of traditional advertising is not with a polished jingle or a celebrity cameo, but with a regular guy in a void, rapping with all his heart about the layered majesty of a disposable plastic bowl of food. And so we arrive at the final, perfect pinnacle of our absurd journey, a commercial that proves sometimes the most powerful idea is also the simplest and most inexplicable. After a parade of talking babies, chaotic Vikings, and nightmare-fueled spongmonkeys, We conclude with a moment of pure, minimalist joy from Cadbury that took the concept of selling without selling to its absolute zenith. The ad, known as the Eyebrow Dance or Eyebrow Kids, is a masterclass in restraint, a 30-second film that dares you to look away from its bizarre, hypnotic, and utterly delightful premise. The setup is breathtakingly sparse. Two children, a boy and a girl, sit perfectly still against a plain, dark background. They are not speaking, they are not holding a product. For the first several seconds, they simply stare into the camera with neutral expressions, and then the music begins, a funky, electronic, instrumental track by the band Freeform 5 called Perspex Sex. It's a groove that is both modern and slightly retro, a beat that feels both cool and completely accessible. As the rhythm kicks in, the children begin their performance. It is a performance of one single, repetitive motion. They raise their eyebrows, but this is no simple twitch. They raise them in perfect, intricate time with the music, hitting every synth stab and drum fill with a precise, arched lift of their brows. Their expressions remain otherwise completely deadpan, making the movement even more surreal and hilarious. It's a bizarre, robotic dance performed entirely with the muscles of their foreheads, a tiny concert of facial choreography that is impossible to define and even harder to resist. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of this concept is what makes it so brilliant. There is no story, no joke, no logical reason for this to be happening. Cadbury is a chocolate company famously associated with a very different, gentler style of advertising. This ad makes zero attempt to connect the action to the product. There is no mention of chocolate, no shot of a dairy milk bar, no suggestion that eating Cadbury will make your eyebrows dance. For 28 of its 30 seconds, it exists as a pure piece of art, a standalone viral video that just happens to have a chocolate company's name attached to it at the very end. This was a monumental gamble, a belief that by giving the audience a genuine moment of unexpected delight and asking for nothing in return, they would generously repay that gift with immense goodwill toward the brand. It was an act of marketing faith, a bet that the best way to sell happiness was simply to show it in its most abstract and joyful form. The public's response was an avalanche of positivity. The commercial didn't just become a hit, it became a genuine global phenomenon. It was shared endlessly online, dissected on television shows, and mimicked in schoolyards and offices across the world. People were captivated by its weirdness and its charm. It won a shelf full of prestigious advertising awards, including a Gold Lion at Cannes, not for its sales strategy but for its sheer creative bravery. It worked because it was so completely and utterly unexpected. In a cluttered media landscape where viewers are conditioned to ignore traditional sales pitches, the Cadbury eyebrow ad broke through by offering a gift instead of making a demand. It created a powerful emotional association, the feeling of spontaneous, inexplicable joy, and it permanently fused that feeling to the Cadbury brand. It proved that the most absurd, and therefore the most memorable, commercial isn't always the loudest or the most complex. Sometimes it's the quietest idea in the room, the one that simply sits there, and with nothing more than a perfectly timed raise of an eyebrow, wins over the entire world. And so our wild ride through the most gloriously bizarre corners of American advertising comes to a close. We've witnessed everything from the hypnotic repetition of HeadOn to the surreal terror of the Quiznos Spongmonkeys, from the quiet desperation of Fred the Baker to the operatic demands of J.G. Wentworth. We've seen talking babies, Viking hordes, and a puppet chef saved by a paper towel. It's been a journey through a world where logic is optional and memorability is the ultimate currency. These commercials, in all their baffling, annoying, and hilarious glory, are more than just forgotten interruptions in our television schedules. They are vibrant, strange artifacts of our culture, permanent residents in the shared attic of our collective memory. This parade of absurdity begs a fascinating question. Why does this bizarre approach work so well? Why do we remember the commercial with the screaming baker long after we've forgotten 1,000 polished car ads? The answer lies in the fundamental way our brains are wired. In a constant stream of predictable information, our minds are jolted awake by the unexpected. The bizarre, the surreal, and the utterly illogical create a cognitive glitch, a moment of confusion that forces us to stop and pay attention. That moment of "what did I just watch?" is pure marketing gold. It creates a powerful synaptic bookmark, etching the brand name into our memory alongside the peculiar feeling the ad evokes. Whether that feeling is joy, confusion, or even revulsion is almost secondary to the fact that a strong emotion was triggered. These ads don't just sell a product, they create an experience, an inside joke, or a shared moment of bewilderment that we feel compelled to talk about, thus doing the advertising work for them. In the brutal economy of our attention, absurdity isn't a risk. It's a calculated strategy to bypass our filters and plant a flag directly in our consciousness. Now we want to turn the microphone over to you. This journey through advertising absurdity is a collective one, and everyone has a commercial that lives in their head rent-free. What's yours? Was it the existential dread of the life call lady, the smooth cadence of the KFC famous bowls wrapper, a local car dealership character so strange they deserve their own documentary? Dive into the comments below and share your personal pick for the most absurd, unforgettable commercial you've ever seen. Let's build the ultimate hall of fame for marketing madness together. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the wonderfully weird side of American culture, make sure you don't miss out on our next exploration. Hit that like button if you found yourself remembering these ads fondly or traumatically. Subscribe to the channel for more content that digs into the bizarre corners of pop culture history, and ring that notification bell so you're always the first to know when we drop a new video. The world is full of strange stories, and we're just getting started. Until next time, keep your eyes open. You never know what absurdity is waiting just around the corner or on your screen.